baby, you're all that I have. Baby, take me on. Baby, take me on.
Alrighty, everybody. How are we all doing today? My name is Ben. Love those banging tunes. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you for joining the Culture and Nature Festival Multilingual Online Snorkeling. My name is Ben, Port Phillip EcoCentre. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So there's just a few housekeeping things before we get into the nitty-gritty of this online snorkeling. It will be lots of fun today. Just for the participants that are involved at the moment, we ask during the Zoom to keep muted. You can ask questions via the Q&A tool. It's located right at the bottom. And the chat function, just as a reminder, is off for all participants. But for those of you who are listening in Hindi audio, download the Interprefy app. That is INTERPREFY app and enter the token snorkel CNF 2021 and select audio, and you'll be able to hear me in Hindi, which I think is remarkable. This webinar will be recorded on EcoCentre's YouTube channel, EcoCentre TV. And another reminder that there are heaps of events for today and tomorrow. All you have to do in order to find them is go to ecocentre.com/CNF 2021. So like I said before, my name is Ben. I'm joined by both Ella and Zaylee, Port Phillip EcoCentre. They're going to be behind the scenes. You're going to be listening to me the entire time, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So who am I? My name is Ben Francischelli. I'm an educator at the Port Phillip EcoCentre, but I'm also a paleontologist. I am very interested in the past, and particularly the past of Port Phillip Bay. I'm going to be taking you on a journey into Port Phillip Bay itself, where we're going to go snorkeling and finding all kinds of remarkable animals, the ones that live in the bay today, and the ones that lived in the bay in the past, when it wasn't even a bay, when it was open water, some terrifying predators, the likes of which do not exist today, including the megalodon, the largest shark the world has ever seen. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to share with you a presentation that I created. We're just going to go straight from the beginning. These are some of the animals that you might expect to see in Port Phillip Bay. Of course, where is Port Phillip Bay? It's a huge embayment, almost 2,000 square kilometers of open water. It's located just off the city of Melbourne, and lots of people looking at it wouldn't realize that there is a menagerie of remarkable animals that live there, from tiny sharks such as the Port Jackson shark that you can see in the top left-hand corner. They've got these brilliant teeth that look an awful lot like jelly beans. They're really cool. You've also got the likes of seals, fur seals, and some of them get to really chunk sizes. I mean, they can get 250 kilos plus. You can find down the bottom of Port Phillip Bay. And then there's Victoria's emblem, marine emblem, the weedy sea dragon. You can see the male carrying the eggs there. And of course, they're aptly named because they have these weedy-like appendages coming off of their body to blend into their environment. They're stunningly beautiful animals. And then the last image that you've got there is of a very grumpy, fat-looking toadfish, a globefish, the kind that when they blow up, they get to about 3 times their normal size, look a little bit like a basketball, but they're very friendly, very docile. And in almost every single dive that I go in Port Phillip Bay, I see these creatures. We've got some really interesting questions popping up. And before I go to the next slide, I did want to answer them. One of the questions was, what does it look like underneath the surface of the bay? What would I see if I went snorkeling? Well, it's a really intriguing thought. Namely, it's very cold in Port Phillip Bay itself. Even during summer, it only gets to a top of about 20 degrees, and that's it. So if you have a wetsuit, I recommend that you wear a wetsuit. As you dive underneath the water, it's this calm that envelops every single portion of your body. You can go in, you can go over the sandy banks, over to the seagrass itself. You can see these incredible life forms, depending on whether or not you focus on the microcosm, the really infinitesimally small portions of it, like the dinoflagellates that are floating in the water, to the giant smooth stingrays that can be about 3 meters across. They are some of the largest stingrays in the world. And every now and again, we get occasional migrants like humpback whales even coming into the bay as well. And just for Debbie to know as well, she asked, will this presentation be recorded for viewing again later? Yes, it will be recorded and kept on EcoCentre TV on our YouTube. So that's for you to know. So let's go to the next slide right now. I'm going to talk about the different habitats that you can find. When I was younger, I was always inextricably drawn to the bay. I saw it as this final refuge, the last place where wilderness really existed in the suburbs. And so I just threw myself in there every single given opportunity. When you get underneath the water, this is what you see. You'll see these reefs often covered with these algae and sponges, but every single color of the rainbow. The area where you might go snorkeling and even go swimming with your family, the rocky surfaces between the upper and the lower reaches of the tides. There's a lot of diversity within that given area. And even the soft substrates that look like giant deserts harbor a remarkable amount of life just underneath the sand. There's also seagrass meadows where you can see your friends, the weedy sea dragon. And the populations in Port Phillip Bay are actually quite healthy as well. There are a number of weedy sea dragons, particularly down to the southernmost reaches like Rye Pier that you can go see. All you need to do in order to go see them is get your mask, go on a day with good clarity and low winds, and you should be able to find them. The other thing that makes Port Phillip Bay so incredibly unique are its sponge gardens. And they colonize in large and very selective areas in large numbers and produce, again, the most incredible array of colors that you've ever seen. And the area that I particularly like an awful lot, because this is where the really big animals exist: seals, sharks, stingrays, the open water, the areas above the sea floor. So this gives you an idea of an idealized food web in Port Phillip Bay itself. And every single component is just as important as the last. So you've got tiny little algal creatures, probably dinoflagellate-like creatures that swim in the open ocean. You've also got, they are in turn eaten by zooplankton, which are tiny little creatures, probably no bigger than the white part of your thumbnail, that are floating in the water. They can be the larvae of sea urchins and everything else in between. They are in turn eaten by anchovies, which are eaten by fish, which are eaten by penguins. The penguins, unfortunately for them, as cute as they are, and I know, I can't say the word penguin properly. It's just not possible. I don't know why. I just can't do it. They are in turn eaten by the fur seals that we talked about in a few slides beforehand. And every now and again, you get the largest macro-predatory fish in the entire world coming through Port Phillip Bay, the great white shark. It's 6 meters in length, 2 metric tons, teeth serrated just like a steak knife. There is no wonder why people see this animal and awe. It really is quite incredible. I love the question. Are dinoflagellates dinosaurs? No, they have a very similar sounding name. Dinoflagellates are tiny little algal creatures that float in the water. If you're lucky, every now and again, very calm nights, what they do is they glow in the water as well, and you can walk, see this almost this blue bioluminescence on the water itself. You can see it in Port Phillip Bay if you're lucky. As I was attracted to all these different animals in Port Phillip Bay, I was really fascinated by the ones that were living now, but also the ones that lived in the past. And it was the ones that lived in the past in Port Phillip Bay that really struck me more than anything else. So if you were in the 1970s and you were snorkeling around Port Phillip Bay itself, you would have gotten the chance to see this creature, the grey nurse shark. And to any casual observer, it has these jagged array of teeth projecting from the bottom of its jaws. When Europeans first saw this creature, they thought that it was a man-eater. They thought it was out to get them. But the reality is very different. This is a creature that has no interest in human beings whatsoever and only wants to eat fish, maybe the occasional shark, and stingray, but that is it. But they have these thin, needle-sharp teeth, and they really do look menacing. But once you understand more about their biology, you understand that they don't pose any risk to you whatsoever. Unfortunately, the later parts of the 1800s and the early 1900s, we put a bounty on the head of this animal. The last one was seen in Port Phillip Bay in 1970. We went around, and unfortunately, because we thought it was a man-eater, we killed every single last one. It was an integral component of the ecosystem. It had quite clearly, according to the fossil record, been there for an excess of over 30 million years. And then bang, in the blink of a geological eye, as soon as Europeans hit the continents, unfortunately, we no longer see the shark anymore in Port Phillip Bay and even in the state of Victoria. They're completely functionally extinct all throughout the state. You can still find them in New South Wales and even in Queensland, but the thought that you could see one of these amazing creatures while snorkeling is really sad. It's to think that you can't see it today. Quite often, the question comes up is, why can't we reintroduce the shark? Oops, sorry, wrong one. Why can't we reintroduce the shark into Port Phillip Bay? And there's a really intriguing answer to that, and it comes down to fundamental aspects of their anatomy. So they do something called intrauterine cannibalism. And it's as gross as you think it is. It really is disgusting, where there's about 6 or 7 pups in the womb at any given time in the uterus. And there's only one by the end of a 9-month period, because that pup will eat each of its brothers and sisters in the womb. Because of that, the female can take up to 2 years to recover from a single birthing event. And that's the reason why we're probably not going to see any grey nurse sharks anytime in Port Phillip Bay. So I have seen a grey nurse shark before, but it was in an aquarium, the Melbourne Aquarium. Unfortunately, Mitchell, which was the very last shark in captivity in Victoria, passed away late last year. So he was the very last one. It's a real shame to think that we don't have grey nurse sharks anymore, not even in captivity. But my fascination with the past and with snorkeling took me to another area, another realm. And depending on who you talk to, most people who go snorkeling in Port Phillip Bay have experiences with the modern fauna. They'll see seahorses, they'll see sea dragons, they'll see really large stingrays. But for me, that was something different. I saw the past and I saw it come alive. And I found these remarkable fossils in an area called Bayside, roughly 30 minutes outside of Melbourne. What I'd have to do in order to find them is to go snorkeling, put my mask on, hold my breath, and dive to the bottom of the sea floor. Now, the animal that we've got up here was made famous by Jason Statham in 2018 film, The Meg. And lo and behold, the Meg was real. It was an actual animal that did exist at about 3 to 5 million years ago along the Australian coastline. We know that it is well and truly dead, but that tooth that you can see there, I found that tooth in November 14th, 2018, and it was an incredible chance discovery as well. And I'll tell you how we went about finding one of the largest shark teeth ever found on the continent of Australia. On November 14th, it was a late day. The sun was just about to set. I was with my colleagues. I was absolutely exhausted from snorkeling all day. We'd found remains of animals that dated back 5 to 6 million years on the bottom of the seafloor by snorkeling for them in the bay. And I looked at all my colleagues, I brought them all together, and I said, do you see the pinnacle at the far right, over 200 meters away? We're going to swim as far as we can all the way out to that. If we find something, that's amazing. If we find nothing, that's okay as well. So we decided to go out. We swam all the way out to the pinnacle. I dunked my head underneath the surface. The clarity was incredible. You could see 10 meters all around. We swam all the way over to the pinnacle. And can you guess what we found? Absolutely nothing. And I was like, oh, bugger. Can't win every single time, can you? So I decided to come back through the shallows and swim and slowly meander my way back to where I'd left my bags on the beach. And it was at that moment, about 100 meters in, that I saw this dense contortion of bone sticking out of the surface of the sands. And I thought, boy, that's weird. I feel like I've seen that before. I dunked my head, held my breath, went closer to it, got my gloved hand and wafted the grit and the sand away from it. And there, shining back at me, was blue enamel, a serrated edge, just like a steak knife. I got my gloved hand again and wafted the grit and the sand away and went. And there, staring back at me, was one of the largest shark teeth ever found on the continent of Australia. I looked it up in my hands. It was loose, the bottom of the seafloor in Bayside, and there it was, the image that you can see below you right now. And the megalodon, for many reasons, is an incredible animal. 15 meters in length, 50 metric tons, the same size as a mature humpback whale. This was an animal that was quite possibly one of the largest predators the world had ever seen. And this was some of the only evidence that we've ever found in the bay. We found it through snorkeling. There's a lot to share about Port Phillip Bay. And the last slide that I wanted to share with you today was talking about some of the areas that you can go yourself in order to do it. Now, if you want to go snorkeling, there are some very important rules. You have to make sure that you are with colleagues and friends and make sure that they're looking out for you as well. You have to make sure that the weather conditions are right for when you go into the water. I don't go into the water if I know it's going to be southerly winds, blowing a gale. It's not worth, you're not going to see anything in the water whatsoever. Other times I've hopped into the water, the conditions are perfect, but I can only see a couple of meters ahead of me. And that's it. So I don't even bother trying to go in from that point onwards. Somebody's asked, when is the best season to go diving? Winter is very difficult in order to go diving. It is so excruciatingly cold if you don't have a wetsuit. The bay can get down to almost single-digit temperatures in the absolute middle of winter. I do not recommend you go then. Now is the warmest period of the year. The nights are hot. You can go out till 9 o'clock at night because there's still light. I recommend that if you go snorkeling, the best time to do it is throughout summer, to have a wetsuit, even then, and to get into the water. But if you do want to go snorkeling, these areas around Point Cook, right at the top of the bay, are fantastic, where the Jawbone Reserve is near the city of Port Phillip. I've also got an arrow pointing to Beaumaris, where I find many of my fossils, remarkable fossils. And then right at the bottom, you can see Rye, and that's where you find those witty sea dragons that we talked about a little bit earlier as well. Near the pier on either side of it, you should be able to find them there. But if you do want to go snorkeling, it is critical that you have the occupational health and safety of yourself and your friends that are with you. Know what you're doing. Don't touch things that you don't know anything about. If you don't know anything about that sea urchin, don't pick it up because it could hurt you. Luckily for us, we don't have any venomous varieties of sea urchins in the bay. They're just a bit pestilent, but they're not venomous as such. Know what kind of animals that you can find out there. There are the giant stingrays that get to about the same size as a car, the largest varieties of stingray in the entire world, but they will do nothing to hurt you as long as you give them space and understand their behavior. There's blue-ringed octopus in the bay as well. And if they do bite you, you can potentially die as a result of the venom that courses through your veins. But in the decade that I've been snorkeling, I've been picking up a lot of rocks, and I've never had an incident with a blue-ringed octopus before. They're these gorgeous creatures that are about the same size as your fists that pulsate these blue and yellow rings all over their body. When they do that, they're telling you that they're pissed off. Don't come near me, because if you do, I might just bite you, in the same way that a snake might rear up about to bite you if you get too close to it. These animals, most of the time, will tell you. And quite often I get the question, Ben, what is the most dangerous thing in the bay? I can tell you right now, it's not sharks. It's people on jet skis every day of the week. They are the scariest because they quite often don't listen to where they have to be. They don't stay within the zones that they're supposed to. When I go swimming, I always carry a buoy on the back of me that's constantly floating behind me so people can see where I am at every single given moment. And there's been incidences where people have come far too close with jet skis and even bigger boats. So that's the kind of thing that you need to be aware of. There's a really great question here as well. Are we allowed to take anything home that we find in the ocean? It very much depends on where you are at that given time. If you are within a marine sanctuary, no, you can't take anything out of it whatsoever. It has to stay exactly where it is. If you think that you find something of scientific importance, like a megalodon tooth, as an example, what you need to do is contact the relevant agency or body so that they can take it out, because those specimens do represent something of scientific interest. You call the museum up, you notify them of exactly where it is, and they may even bring you out with you so that you can see how it's taken out in the proper way as well. So shells and things like that, I'm not a big fan of taking anything with me if it's not of scientific importance. If it's not the first of something, if it's not something that's going to enlighten us as to the understanding of evolution, I don't even like taking shells, because the shells will eventually be crushed up to make the beaches that you guys swimming on as well. So if everyone took a shell from every single beach, there'd be a lot less shells that people would be able to see, that other organisms would be able to use as a refuge or as a habitat. So it's important that we keep even the smallest of shells on these beaches, just in case for that reason. So there's another really interesting question that I've got answered here, and I might just finish this slide just here and get out of this here. How do I do that again? What am I looking at? Zoom, 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 zoom. Sorry guys, just give me a second, stop share, there we go. So there's a few more really interesting questions that have come up as well. Are there any geophysical equipment with the ability to scan underwater to locate fossils? No, unfortunately not. I have tried to look for technology that is like that. In other areas of the world where you have certain minerals that are attached to the fossils, such as vivianite, you can actually train a dog to sniff out the vivianite and try and find these fossils. But underwater, it's almost impossible. There are ways with which to scan the surface below the water itself and to map the geology, but even then, they're really expensive. And still the best way that you can do it is by having that map in the back of your head of what these fossils look like, because they're covered in algae. They sporadically come out of these deposits by the active erosion of the given area. And then you find them just lying on the bottom of the seafloor, just covered in all these algae, and it can be really difficult in order to determine what they are. So there's another really wonderful question here that I really wanted to answer, and that question is, are there any introduced species that are affecting the health of the bay? And there's lots, and it's very unfortunate that that's the case. So when it comes to Port Phillip Bay, we are a destination, as it were, for many tankers from all over the world, and quite possibly one of the most pestilent species that exists within Port Phillip Bay didn't exist before the early 90s. It's called the Northern Pacific Sea Star. If Ella or Zaylee could get that image up of a Northern Pacific Sea Star and share from their screen, that would be really awesome, just to give an idea of exactly what it is that we're talking about. It's a 5-armed star. It's roughly the same size as my hand. It's got these orange and purple hues all the way throughout its body. And unfortunately, it was introduced in the mid-90s from tankers from Japan and the North Sea. And they are a voracious species. They eat practically everything and anything that is around them. Fantastic. So Zaylee is just going to be sharing her screen now to give you an idea of what they look like. That's exactly what they look like. So a population of only a few individuals was brought in, but the unfortunate thing is that they breed like crazy. A single individual can be capable of laying up to 20 million eggs in a given year. It's a lot of eggs in order to deal with. So, and they just spurt them out into the open water. Now, most of those eggs will die, but a very small percentage will make their way into adults. And because the larvae are free swimming, it almost makes it impossible in order to eradicate as well before they settle as adults on the bottom of the sea floor. They eat everything under the sun. They'll even eat, they have been known to rip off their own arm and eat it when stressed. How do you kill an animal like that? How do you eradicate a pest that has the capacity to do something like that. This is a creature that doesn't have a brain, heart, blood, bones, jaws, teeth, or muscles. So what do you do to eradicate a species? Unfortunately, this species is so well adorned in Port Phillip Bay that I doubt that we will ever get rid of it ever again. There are quite possibly millions in Port Phillip Bay. And even though there may be, even if we get them down to a very few thousand individuals, those few thousand individuals will still be capable of repopulating millions in a very short amount of time. So you really have to admire this species for what it is. It is tenacious, it is voracious. In its native habitat, it is an awesome predator. Unfortunately, though, when it's been introduced to a new area, it becomes a top invertebrate predator itself, outcompeting maybe even the 11-armed sea stars, which get to about 30 centimeters in size and are aptly named because sometimes they have 11 arms, sometimes they have 12 arms, even 13 arms. I've seen one with 9 arms, and they come in all these gorgeous colors. They're the native top invertebrate predator, but this animal is kind of competing with it for that reign. So if you do see one of these creatures, there's not much that you can do. When you see them at the bottom of piers and pylons and jetties, they're so well introduced, I don't think we'll ever get rid of them, which is a real shame. We had a chance to when they were very quickly introduced here, but we didn't act fast enough to get rid of the Northern Pacific sea star. So that's my answer for that one. So there's a really lovely question here as well about spider crabs. Have you seen them recently, and why do they all congregate together? The spider crabs that you can see in Port Phillip Bay, they come round for an annual migration, and they come so that they can breed and they can do their annual molt as well. Crustaceans are really strange. They're very different to you and me. They don't have an internal skeleton. Their skeleton is on the external portions of their body. And so when they get too big for it, what they need to do is basically rip off that exterior skeleton, that exoskeleton, and grow a new one underneath. So they congregate together for safety, also to breed as well. And I have had the chance to go and see these spider crabs that occur usually during the best part of winter. There's hundreds of individuals, thousands, tens of thousands of crabs that congregate right towards the bottom of Port Phillip Bay, near some of the piers like Rye and Sorrento and Portsea. That's really stunning when you see that. There's just so many that you can see in every single direction. And as you might expect, the predators expect them to be there too. They actively go out of their way to wait for individuals that have just recently molted because they're softer, and then they go out of their way to eat them. It's a really fantastic thing. These giant stingrays that hover over the top of these massive sea crabs. Sometimes they even form pyramids all bundled over one another, trying to just, I'm not entirely sure what it is when they bundle into that giant pyramid, maybe for breeding purposes, but they're really marvelous species that we have in Port Phillip Bay. And it shows again just how lucky we are to have this incredible embayment on our doorstep. These animals are here, and all you need to do in order to see creatures as large as a car is go snorkeling and have fun doing it. So you mentioned, this is another question that's come through, and I love the question. So Ben, you mentioned that you're a paleontologist. What's your favorite dinosaur that used to live in the bay? Well, we do have a dinosaur that lives in the bay right now, and not many people know about it. First thing that I need to tell you is that 66 million years ago, not all dinosaurs died out. There were some that survived the mass extinction event. Non-avian dinosaurs like the Tyrannosaurus rex, your Triceratops, your Stegosaurus, they all were wiped from the face of the earth. Mind you, Stegosaurus died out a lot earlier than the rest, but you get my drift. There was one group of dinosaurs that survived, the birds, and they are wonderfully successful. Penguins, and I know I can't say the word. It's so silly. I don't know why I can't pronounce penguins properly. Are dinosaurs. They are marine dinosaurs, probably more marine than any other dinosaur that ever existed at the time of the dinosaurs. And some of them can reach some crazy depths. We know the emperor penguin can reach depths of about 500 meters and hold their breath for over 20 minutes at a time. And so what we see in Port Phillip Bay are the species known as the little penguin that aggregate in the St. Kilda Pier. And what's really cool about them is they were only recently put there. So they actually came all the way from Port Phillip Islands, another colony through there that currently has about 32,000 breeding pairs. And they made their way all up to the St. Kilda Pier breakwater, where they realized that it was a fox-free environment. It was a predator-free environment. And they started nesting, and now there are thousands of individuals that lay their eggs there. So that's one of my most favorite dinosaurs, but I'm going to show you a picture in just a moment. I'm going to share my screen and give you an idea. Now, this is an old slide that I did last year for a presentation on the fossils of Bayside, but I wanted to show you this one just here. This is my favorite dinosaur of all time. And why it is my favorite dinosaur is because there's nothing like it that lives today. This is Pelagornis, the largest shark that, sorry, I'm just trying to get this up. Just give me one moment. No, we're just going to leave it like that. It's perfectly fine. So this is Pelagornis just here. It's not a shark. Don't listen to me. It wasn't that at all. This is the largest flying bird that's ever existed. The only evidence that we can find of them on the continent is in Bayside, in Port Phillip Bay, under the waves. And I've had the opportunity to find evidence of this remarkable bird. And immediately when you see it, its size is really engaging. It's got a wingspan the same as the height of a giraffe, 6 meters across, but it's that wonderful beak that sets it apart from every other bird on the planet. They have things called pseudo-teeth that would have been perfectly adapted for ensnaring slippery prey as it glided over the top of the water. And their affinity is really strange. You'd think they might be more closely aligned with albatrosses or maybe even pelicans. That is not the case. These animals are more closely related to ducks and chickens. So make sense of that. But some of the only evidence you can find on the continent comes from Bayside of these remarkable pelargoniids, the largest flying birds. So they're my favorite dinosaurs. And I love finding their bones on the bottom of the seafloor in Bayside. So let's have a look through some of the other questions that we've got here as well. I'd love to go diving, but I'm really scared about what's in the ocean. Is there a good place for me to practice? Well, what I'll do again is I'll share my screen and I'll share the last slide that we had just here, and particularly where it points to around Beaumaris. Just above Beaumaris itself is a national marine park called Ricketts Point. And Ricketts Point is a stunningly beautiful area that is protected from overfishing. So many different life forms have come back as a result of it. And it's there that you can very easily go snorkeling. It's a very protected embayment. You will see large stingrays. You might even see the occasional shark, like a Port Jackson shark. But remember, sharks aren't out there to try and get you. The vast majority of sharks that we have on the planet today want absolutely nothing to do with you. You're actually more likely to die as a result of a cow running you over than ever being bitten by a shark. So watch out for those cows, because I mean, we eat a lot of them. There are billions on the planet. So if you're scared of what you think you might see when you're in the water, best thing that you can do is try to understand the different life forms that are in there as well. Do your research, try and figure out what it is that you'll see. And one suggestion, if you look up on YouTube and you go Ricketts Point Marine Sanctuary, you'll see videos of exactly what it's like to go diving and actually see these creatures. Now, to give you an idea of what it's like to go diving, Zaylee just said before that she's actually got some footage of the spider crabs that a fellow EcoCentre employee, Matt MacArthur, took. Zaylee, would you be able to share that footage and I can narrate over the top of it as it plays? Would you be able to do that? Can give you a bit of time with which to do that, because the spider crab aggregation really is just stunning. There are just so many in every single which way and shape and form. And it'll give you a great idea of what to expect when you do go to Port Phillip Bay. You do see isolated crabs every now and again. They usually come out from much deeper waters in order to come through to this migration. But Matt, who videoed this, this footage that you're about to see in just a moment, he's taken some fantastic footage of all across the bay itself. And if he were here right now, he would tell you just how amazing this place is. Oh, I've just been told that it's not working, and that is perfectly fine, Zaylee, not a problem whatsoever. You'll just have to imagine it instead, and that's it. So there's another really great question here, and it asks, can stingrays hurt us? Well, the name itself, stingray, implies that they do have the ability to hurt or maybe injure us. And of course, there is a very famous individual who was killed by a stingray, Steve Irwin. He was killed by a smooth ray, and it is a very tricky subject to navigate when you're talking about stingrays themselves. But in the decade that I've been going snorkeling in Port Phillip Bay, I see these creatures on every single dive. And I can tell you right now, there is no reason why these creatures would ever sting you with their barb. The absolute largest we've got, like we've mentioned before, is the smooth ray. Gets to about the same size as a car. Their tail can be quite long, and on the end of this tail, they've got a large barb that can reach about 40 to 45 centimeters on the end of it. It has these serrations going in such a way that if it penetrates your flesh, it does more damage taking it out than it does going in. So it's a really nasty weapon to have on the end of its tail, but it is there as a means of defense. These stingrays quite often get eaten by seals. They even get eaten by larger sharks and orcas. There's some fantastic footage of killer whales from New Zealand eating smooth rays, and just how terrifying it is for the smooth ray to have to do that. They have these barbs as a means of defense. If you are silly enough to go up to an animal that weighs the same as a cow and try to pat it on its head when you know that it's got a barb on the end of its tail that's that big, it's not a smart idea. You really have to be careful with these animals, but as long as you give them space, they won't do anything to you whatsoever. So they are remarkable creatures just for their size alone, but they are very inquisitive, very docile. On a number of dives, they've come straight up to me just to see what I'm doing. They kind of figure out who I am. You can kind of see that they're thinking, and then they just swim away. Now, if you are in the water with a stingray and they do exhibit aggressive behavior, what they will do is they will actually raise their tail above their body, just like how a scorpion has its tail above its body to say, get out of here. Don't come near me because I'm aggravated and I don't want to deal with you whatsoever. You can read that very visibly whenever they have that tail above their body. So as long as you have the smarts of knowing what their behavior is like, giving them the space, they shouldn't do anything to you. Most stingray incidents occur as a result of people accidentally stepping on their heads because they do submerge themselves completely under the sand. So it does happen from time to time. So Zaylee's telling me she thinks she's figured it out with the spider crabs. Fantastic. Let's get it up. Let's have a look at what it's like to go snorkeling under the water, Port Phillip Bay, when these aggregations of spider crabs coming into the bay in the dead of winter. You can see a few sparse individuals, their white-tipped claws starting to tread on the bottom, and then it's here that you start to see these mass aggregations. Look at them all. They're everywhere. They're absolutely ridiculous, and just how many come through. So they have a carapace that's about the same size as a head of lettuce. They are quite a large crab in that regard, but they're not very tasty either. They kind of taste a little bit like dirt because they're eating benthic organisms, very small creatures that live within the sand and the grit itself. You can hear Matt breathing in the background there. And he's placed the camera on the ground to get a better idea of what it looks like if you were a crab walking amongst these other crabs just here, bumping the camera. It's really great. You can see some of them are covered in algae as well. So they have not yet shed their entire exoskeleton. They will in just a moment, though. Quite often, some of these crabs have these incredible sponges adorned all over their body, and it can even benefit them with camouflage. Crazy views that we're seeing right now of these remarkable guys crawling right over the top of the camera. What a stunning view just there. You can get a really good look of the entire underside of the carapace. It's there that you can determine whether or not it's a male or a female as well. And the female quite often has a lot of eggs. You can see some garfish swimming right at the top of the surface just there. And that must be in excess of about 3 meters of depth. That was an awesome video. Thank you, Zaylee, for showing this just now. So that gives you an idea of what it's like to go snorkeling in Port Phillip Bay. And hopefully some of the things that I've talked to you about inspire you to want to go out there and experience it for yourself. And it is cold. Don't get me wrong. It is freezing cold when you get in there for the very first time. This view that you see behind me, it's not really accurate. This isn't what you'll really see in Port Phillip Bay, but it is a whole new world. And remember, the reason that I wanted to get out there in the first place, because I saw it as this last wildlife refugia. Everywhere else in the suburbs that I lived in southeast Melbourne was kind of just inundated with these bland looking trees. There weren't many eucalypts around or anything like that. It had been almost invaded by humans, and there weren't any kangaroos, there weren't any emus, nothing like that. You really have to go really far out in order to see that kind of thing. But in the ocean, in the water, that reality was still there. You could still see these incredible animals. There's another question that I want to answer just here. Ben, what's the scariest experience you've ever had while snorkeling? I have an idea. I have an idea of how I'm going to answer this question. And I think the best way that I can answer this question, take you with me. So I was diving down. I was about 1.5 meters under the water. I was coming back up every now and again for a breath and then coming back down, looking for fossils on the bottom of the sea floor. My colleague, he shouted out of the corner of his ear. He said, Ben, come over here. I've got something big. And I said, fantastic. Swam over to where he was. I breaststroked all the way through in order to see where he was. And he pointed to this very large object on the bottom of the seafloor that was as large as my arm and twice as thick. What it was the jaw of an ancient sperm whale that was about 5 million years of age. Unfortunately, none of its teeth were left, but there were these big sockets where all these sponges and corals had been stuck over the top of it. I said, amazing finds. And what I did is I held my breath, went straight to the bottom of the seafloor. I've got a weight belt that kind of helped me get to the bottom of the seafloor because it's very difficult to do so unless you're negatively buoyant. So I held my breath, went down to the bottom of the seafloor, let off little bubbles as I was walking, picked it up. It was loose, bottom of the seafloor, checked out the specimen, couldn't see anything around it. There were no stingrays nearby. And then I just started walking on the bottom of the seafloor, holding my breath. I got to about 20 seconds. I was a bit pooped. I put the specimen back down on the bottom, came back up for air, came up and went, fantastic. Got my breath again, went back under, hit the bottom of the seafloor again, picked up the specimen, and walked all the way back to the foreshore. I was about 500 meters away from where we were. By the end of it, I was absolutely exhausted. My arms were fatiguing. It was a heavy thing. It was about 25 kilos in weight, solid rock, except for where those teeth were missing. And we got it up to the top of the foreshore. I lied down in the sand and I went, thank God, I'm done. I don't have to do it anymore. Of course, not realizing then that I also had to bring it up to the car, up the side of a very steep cliff as well, in order to keep it safe. And at that moment, my colleague who was with me, who had first spotted it, he said, Ben, what's that thing coming out of the jaw? He pointed to it, and it was about this big, the size of a 20-cent piece. And he saw this beautiful, iridescent, ocellated octopus coming out of it, a blue-ringed octopus that I had inadvertently carried the entire way from its home to the beach itself. Now, if you do find something that's of scientific importance, the reason I was able to pick it up was because I was working with Museums Victoria at the time, and that was my job in order to find specimens like this. If you do find things of scientific interest, we ask that you leave them where they are and you contact the museum so they can go and get it and extract it carefully. But I knew what I was doing. I knew everything about what I was doing. When I saw that tiny little blue-ringed octopus just pop out, it kind of gave me a little bit of a spook. But then I realized it's not going to hurt me whatsoever. So I took off my mask, I filled it up with water, I put the blue-ringed octopus in my mask, pushed it back into the water and saw it just jettison off with its siphon into deeper waters. It was a gorgeous animal. But that was a really cool experience that kind of spooked me a little bit. So that was probably one of the scariest encounters, but it was also a very cute encounter by the same time, just because I didn't expect this highly venomous animal to be stuck inside the jaws of this prehistoric sperm whale that I'd carried up the beach. It kind of did give me a spook, but once I realized what it was and that it was there was no harm involved with it at all. So another question here. I've heard Port Phillip Bay being compared to the Great Barrier Reef in terms of variety of species. Is this true? And it is very true. 85% endemism across the southern reaches of Australia, particularly in Victoria and Port Phillip Bay. So what that means is 85% of species you can't find anywhere else in the world. That is how stunningly beautiful these areas are. And the diversity is akin to that of the Great Barrier Reef. It's just that there's a lot more work done on the Great Barrier Reef because of all the different stunning colors that you can see in those reefs, because it's a lot more accessible to the average tourist than what Port Phillip Bay is with its very cold waters. But I'm telling you now, we are so lucky that we have this embayment. Every single time I go into the water, I think to myself, I must be one of the luckiest people in the world to live in Melbourne, to live so close to the wonderful biodiversity that we have in this bay. And for me, that there are so many wonderful fossils that we can also find as well. Another question that we've got here, do you see a lot of plastic in the ocean while diving? And I can tell you right now, it is a huge issue. And we're only just beginning to uncover how much of an issue the plastic crisis is. So plastic in itself is a very versatile medium. You can mold it to form almost any shape. And for humanity, it's a really useful thing. But the issue are single-use plastics. And people are done with it once, they don't care, they throw it away. Quite often, they don't even use a bin whatsoever. Every single stream, tributary, if you throw cigarette butts on the ground, that cigarette butt will eventually make its way to the lower lying areas and eventually make its way into Port Phillip Bay. You may not think of a cigarette butt as being plastic, but it does have a cellulose filter through it, which is made out of plastic that doesn't break down. The most polluted item in the world is a cigarette. And I see them every single time I dive, and it's disgusting. I absolutely hate seeing the amount of rubbish that I see when I go into the bay. And I don't really know what there is that I can do about it sometimes. You can start picking it up, but then you start picking up so much that it just kind of overwhelms you. You know, there's just so much. The best cause for what we can do at the moment is prevention, is ensuring that we teach everyone the best way of how to dispose of their rubbish. Because different plastics can't be recycled in some circumstances. We have very specific plastics that can be recycled, and some can be reused over and over again. We don't necessarily have to use it just once. So it's a massive issue that we've got in the bay. Another issue we've got in terms of plastics is something called nurdles, like something I like to call preplastics. I don't even know how they manage to find their way into the environment, but go to any beach, start looking in the sands, and what you'll find are these tiny little pellets that are about the same size as a grain of rice. They're tiny and they're everywhere. And a lot of beaches, particularly St. Kilda Beach as well. You go to that beach, you'll inevitably find hundreds, thousands, if you spend enough time looking for them. And the question is, how do they even manage to find their way into the environment at all? They shouldn't be here. And it's a hard one to try and answer, because you're right, they shouldn't be here. But inevitably, what must have happened are accidents, incidents where people have accidentally spilled these tiny pre-packaged, pre-plastic nurdles before they actually make their way into Port Phillip Bay. Tankers may have fallen overboard, and as a result, the shipments that the tankers were actually keeping may have had those nurdles, and the nurdles may have been deposited all the way through the bay. So we don't really know the effect that they're having, but we know that all kinds of organisms are eating these plastics. It's making them feel a lot fuller than what they think, and so they're not getting the full nutrition that they really need as a result of it. So again, it's a new frontier for humanity, trying to understand the role that we have in the world and trying to mitigate the plastic crisis that is occurring right now. So even in the deepest parts of the ocean, you can go 10 kilometers down, you can still find plastic. So off the Tasman Sea, at about 2 to 3 kilometers of depth, there was a VB bottle that was at the bottom there. And I can be absolutely certain that the person who drank that VB bottle could never have imagined that it would end up on the bottom of the seafloor 3 kilometers below the surface of the water. Be aware of what you do with your rubbish, because it can and does end up in Port Phillip Bay and the surrounds if you don't dispose of it appropriately. Have you ever found anything, and this is another question I'm answering, have you ever found anything valuable or strange in the ocean? Maybe something that's fallen off a ship or a boat perhaps. And yeah, I have. Because I'm out of the water maybe once a week, trying to find fossils all the time. I could talk to you about the fossils. You know about the megalodon tooth that I showed you. There's a whole bunch more remarkable fossils that I found. Just to give you an idea, over the last couple of years, 250 individual scientifically valuable specimens from the Bayside region alone. But there is one that comes to mind. There was a message in a bottle that I found back in 2016, in a bottle of about this size, and it had Mandarin writing on the inside of it. And to this day, I'm not entirely sure what it says, but I've still kept it. I don't know where it is right now, but that was really cool. So I've never found a message in a bottle before that, and I still haven't found another one after that. So that was a really cool thing to find. Let's have a look at some of the other questions that we've got here. Have you ever found an animal trapped in plastic whilst diving? Yes, I have. There's been octopi that have been trapped in it. There's been little sardines that have been trapped in plastic as well. It really is devastating to see these animals get caught in this all the time. There's viral footage, really sad footage of a sea turtle. And what it has sticking out of its nose somehow is a straw. The entire straw went all the way throughout its nasal area. And the footage is heartbreaking to see. I mean, make no mistake, what we are doing to the planet is devastating from a number of different perspectives, not just, you know, what we're doing with global climate change as well, but even from the plastic perspective, it is wrought with a lot of difficulties. And the thought that people just don't care is really difficult for me to comprehend. You see people on the side of the street, and they might be smoking, and they just throw the cigarette butt down on the ground. And I think to myself, how do you not care? How, after all this time, do you not know where this rubbish ends up? You know, we're told as kids exactly where this rubbish ends up. It really is not just ignorance, it's a defiance of science that really baffles me. And it really does sadden me. So we're nearing the end. We've only got a couple more minutes, guys. So if you do have questions, feel free to put them in through the chat. I've had a fantastic time with you today. It's really gone by really quickly. I can't believe I really can talk a lot. Can't I, Zaylee? Ella? I talk an awful lot. So it's been great with which to talk to you today. If you do have questions, chuck them into the chat. We can probably have just one more question, and that's it. Remember, this entire incursion that we've done today will be available on EcoCentre TV on our YouTube channel as well. And there are plenty more events for today, later tonight, and even tomorrow as well. All you've got to do in order to see them is go to ecocentre.com/CNF 2021. That's all you've got to do. And there's so many fantastic people that are talking all the way through there. I'll be the tech person on a few of them. You can see them, me behind the scenes again. If you have questions, you can even ask questions as well. I don't mind. So last question that I'll answer today, guys, is I'm inspired to go snorkeling now. Awesome. I'm so glad that you are. Where should I get my equipment, and what do I need as a beginner? Snorkeling equipment can be a little bit expensive. Sometimes it really does do a world of difference to get the best possible equipment. If you go to places like Anaconda, they'll have snorkeling equipment there for you that you can choose. But when I was younger, I didn't have that much money at all. Absolutely nothing to my name. And so I used to go through op shops all the time to try and find wetsuits, to try and find booties and gloves and all the other equipment that was a little bit too expensive for me. So, you know, really diversify. If you have a bit of a budget, go to op shops, see what you can buy. You'd be surprised with how many wetsuits people put out. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Ella. Thank you, Zaylee. I've had a fantastic time. And just that reminder again that if you are interested, this is going to be saved on YouTube TV, on EcoCentre TV, so you can contact us and see us through there. If you do have questions, you can leave them in the chat and I can probably get to them thereafter as well. And there are a bunch more events today. Remember, EcoCentre, where am I looking right now? ecocentre.com/CNF 2021. Thank you so much for joining today. I've had an absolute blast talking about myself and all the questions, the fantastic questions that you put in, even the one, are dinoflagellates dinosaurs? I still love that question because, you know, it's fun. Thank you so much. I'll see you later on. Ciao.